Welcome to Founder-Led Sales. Excited to interview Mac Reddin, founder of Commsor. Mac, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Could you please tell our audience what Commsor is?
I mean, we're a startup that is very much in the midst of founder-led sales right now. So I guess the relevance to the show. We are, we're a tech startup. We're building what we call a go-to-network platform. So we are building sales tech. So there is some like meta-ness to the founder-led sales stuff that we're doing as well. But I don't know how deep you want me to go on describing us. I don't want to make it a full pitch. So
I think that's good. We'll start. Founders, go check it out though. So before we were chatting, you started telling me about your journey. I said, let's stop this. Let's record this. This is really good. Why don't you tell the viewers and listeners about your founder-led sales journey from the kind of origin of your startup through where we are today?
Well, so like if I go really far back, I've been a founder for 13 years, but I've always been a bootstrap founder. I've been much more involved in like the indie hacker, bootstrap, solopreneur kind of world. So like I never considered myself a salesperson, but like when you're building a one-person business, you're obviously constantly selling. And then Commsor started about 4.5 years ago. And once again, no intention of raising money. The goal was to build another bootstrap side project and see what would happen. And then we got sucked up into the craziness of 2021, 2022. VCs just like shoved money at us. The more I told VCs we didn't need their money, the more they wanted to give us their money. And then ultimately our original business turned out to have PMF, just not the right PMF. We had pandemic market fit instead of product market fit. You know, you think of companies like, we weren't as big as them, but like a Hop into the world, like those companies that just like blew up and then cratered right when the pandemic ended.
Throwing money at you. I'm sure any of the founders listening want them, if you're raising, want money thrown in their direction. What were some of kind of the indicators or signals that the founders or the investors saw that they were like, I'm going to throw money at these guys? Was it kind of, what was the traction? What was
I wouldn't take fundraising advice from me, is what I would say. Because I think that period, that 18-month period from 2021 into 2022, the rules and the systems and the process just went out the window. VCs weren't following their own rules. Founders weren't pitching properly. It was like, I didn't have a pitch deck. It was just, I think it was a little bit of like excitement breeds excitement. If you like, sometimes that momentum just builds on itself and it becomes a story that's sort of a little bit outside of your control. We were building in the community space, and I think community had a bit of a moment during the pandemic as companies rushed to invest in online community. So there was a bet of like, will this be a pandemic thing or a post-pandemic thing? And we sort of unintentionally had positioned ourselves at sort of like the tip of that spear of this like community-led movement. So I think it was a combination of just money was crazy. VCs believed in community. We were one of the top 3 companies to bet on at that time. If you believed in community, if those 3 things are true, money flows. But I think the real thing is like
very difficult to replicate, but your honesty is refreshing.
We didn't have a pitch deck for 3 of 4 of our rounds that we raised. It was just like VCs reached out, offered us money, and it was like, okay, I guess we'll take your money. So it's like, my advice to founders is go back in time 3 years. Like, I don't know how else to replicate the scenario we were in. Unless you're doing a hot AI startup right now. Yeah, same thing. Go back maybe like 15 years if you want a house. But
okay, cool. So you got all this money.
Yeah. And we can touch back on this, but like the VCs then pressured us to be like, oh, you've raised a bunch of money. You got to be a more serious company now. So they pressured us to hire a VP of sales, which we did because also I was like, one thing, I've been a founder for a while, but I'd never been VC backed before. So I think once we raised all this money, I had this deep imposter syndrome of like, oh shit, I've never been this kind of founder before. So I started overemphasizing the advice I was getting from VCs and other people because I had this feeling of like, well, they've seen this before. I've never worked at a company bigger than 10 people. Like, what the fuck do I know, right? So I think I took their advice at face value a little too, and not just their advice. Like I read books and I read blog posts and I was like, what are people saying I should do as a CEO? And I stopped being myself. And one of those things was hire a VP of sales, because if you want to scale your company, you got a bunch of money, you got to throw it to scale it, right? Like, if you can't scale it without sales, and you got to hire a VP of sales who then hired a BDR manager who hired, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 BDRs, but it was like, we went from a 1-person sales team plus myself to like an 8-person sales team in like 2 months. And we weren't ready for that. Yeah. It was very premature.
You become a real sales org that isn't necessarily on a strong foundation. Like realism.
Yeah, it looks very shaky foundation. And you were saying just before the thing, it's like, it creates this weird, I think a lot of companies experienced this during that crazy time before like stuff came back down to earth, where like you said, it's like it's pretty good for employees, right? Employee salaries were going through the roof, perks were through the roof. It was like a very much like an employee friendly market, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it meant that there was very little incentive for any employee to be like, hey, this like sales system we're building here like doesn't work, because it was like then they would, like you said, they'd poke holes in it and the system would fall apart.
Yeah, it's in no one's interest
Yeah.
to question the system. I mean, other than the founders and maybe the CFO and other people that are the stewards of the
Yeah.
revenue or the finances of the
But at the
business.
time when money was so easy, it was like, yeah, we'll figure this problem out later, right? A lot of companies, a lot of startups, that was the mindset.
Yeah. So you scaled it up, and you can just flip that switch off, right? No big deal. Whoops, we made a mistake.
No, it's
No?
it's like, you know the
No?
classic saying of like, a bad hire is like one of the costliest mistakes you can make. And it was like we not only did we hire roles we didn't need to hire for, we also hired the wrong person as a sales leader. So it was kind of
Okay.
double whammy in a lot of ways. And it took us, I think it took us like 9 months before we realized, because there's this element of like, well, we can afford it. And you have to have this sort of like undying optimism as a founder, right? Like you have to be like, we will figure this out. We will solve it. Because otherwise, if you don't believe that, how the hell is your team going to believe that? How the hell are your investors going to believe that? How the hell is your market going to believe that? So you end up, I think, when money is easy, you end up like enabling these bets longer than you maybe should, because you can
Okay.
afford them. So it's not a concern. And once we realized it and made the changes, it's just undoing it probably took longer than it actually took to realize the mistake.
And you had to fire people, and you had to stay
Yeah.
optimistic with your company while you're dismantling all this thing that you were telling everybody was going to
Yep.
propel you forward.
And then at the same time, we realized we had pandemic market fit, and that as the pandemic was ending and world was returning to semi-normality, the original product we were building wasn't going where we wanted it to go. We had like we'd close a customer, lose a customer, close a customer, lose a customer. It was like, we had like a churn and burn problem basically. So that combined with a sales org that wasn't functioning the way it needed to, with a product that didn't actually have traction in the market, it was like a double, triple whammy. It was not a fun time. I think if we'd had this conversation 2 years ago, I'd be in a very different state.
Yeah, you have
of mind.
I don't want to say detached. That was the past. You're clearly in a better place now.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk
Yeah.
about that in a minute.
That's old me. The future is bright.
Yeah, old wise Mac now that you've
Yeah.
wizened.
At least wiser. Maybe not wise yet, but
So, but I think it's quite natural for investors who give you money to say, "Hey, we're giving you money. You need to grow
have to
really
spend
fast,
it.
grow fast, spend it, grow revenue. Got to get to that next rate, that next round." So, like, it's a really important for founders to recognize that when they're raising the money, the investors are naturally going to tell them to go really fast with it and spend it. It also is kind of from my take on it, it's kind of like a getting escape velocity, right? They just gave you a ton of jet fuel and they're like, you built a jet, go to the moon. And you're like, I don't know if this is like a real jet. Like if we put all this fuel in here, this is really not going to go.
especially if it's preemptive fuel.
Yeah, we believe it is. So go. And you're like struggling with that. I think that's such an important lesson that VCs are naturally going to pressure founders to do this.
Because that's their model.
Experience.
0 or
It's the
1
model.
as quickly as possible.
And it's okay. I work for a VC. Like it's like it's fine. Doing the steps in the right order, like, is still fundamental to the growth. And I think that's like really important. It's like, yeah, go fast, but go in the right order. And it sounds like the VP of sales hire is the first hire that then needs to justify their existence by hiring lots of people, led to a very
I think
painful experience.
the biggest red flag in hindsight, I think when interviewing for that first sales hire, they were asking like, what's the budget for a team? Like the first thing, they were worried about how big was their team going to be, not about doing the work. And I think the reason why that VP was not the right hire for us is they wanted to be a manager, not a leader, which I think is like, they weren't willing to be a player coach and
But
be in the
VP
trenches.
implies that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you're hiring for that. So whenever I talk to people that are like, we're going to need them to get their hands dirty, I'm like, get rid of the VP of sales title, because if you're hiring VP of sales, they're coming in assuming they're going to be managing and scaling.
That's why I like the head of title. It's just like that works. There's room to go above, room to go below if you need to, and it kind of like, but yeah, title inflation is a real problem, especially in the sales space.
And somebody gave somebody a VP of sales or a CRO title at the previous company, so now that's their title.
Yeah, and they have to have that the next
or
company
that
because
they've
they can't
done
go
any of the things.
down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love it. So,
exactly.
a lot of lessons learned on this first one. What's unique for you is that you did raise all that capital, which created that problem, but you've lived to fight another day and learn from your mistakes. And it sounds like doing it in a better way. Let's talk about that. So pivoted the product, and then after you unwound all of the salespeople and everything, what did you keep from that, and where did you how did you?
I mean, we kept pretty much nothing from old Commsor in a lot of ways. Maybe our logo stayed the same. We still have the dinosaur. That's about it. No, there's some stuff, but in general, we went way smaller. We treated ourselves like a pre-seed team of like, cool, what's the pivot? What's it going to be? Like, keep it small, keep it lean. And at that time, I think we ended up, because we'd raised so much money, our runway was like 42 years or something really stupid.
So time to
it was
figure
just like,
things out.
yeah, it was like, let's not bother. I was like, we're not going to scale. We're not going to hire until we know it's worth it. Because once again,
Okay, so founders going through this and trying to avoid the first thing, what would you say? Because like you had conversations with your investors at this point, and you're like, hey, we're going to figure this out. Like, how does that go? How do you check the investors to be like, hey, listen, let's figure things out before we go to the moon?
I think in general, it was, try to think back of exactly how it happened, because it is like 2 years ago now, year and a half. But it was, I think a lot of it was really just like, it was just about being honest. Like, hey, the thing we're building is just, it's not working. And like, we can keep trying to make it work and burn money, but like, that's not, nobody's happy with that, right? But we had the inkling of the idea we wanted to pivot to. So it became like, hey, here's what we're going to do instead. Here's why I think it's a better option, et cetera. And most of our investors were like, yeah, we invested in you. We believe in you as a founder. Like, this seems like a valid idea. Like, you have the money in the bank. So like, we'd rather you go for it again, because once again, you're either a 0 or you're 1,000 for us, right? There's no in between that we consider a success. So like, go for it. There were a few investors that were like disappointed. They'd very, very specifically invested in like the old idea and they didn't get the new idea quite as much, but that was a minority.
Okay. And then how did you approach founder-led sales the second time?
So I think for me, the mindset was, I was like, I'm not going to hire a salesperson until I'm literally drowning. Like, I cannot do it.
Yeah.
myself.
What is drowning?
I was like, for me, we made the first hire this time around for sales when I was like, I don't have time to do anything but sales. That was like, it's just like, I have, once again, we're a small company. I wear 1,000 different hats, and I was failing at other parts of my responsibility, which is like kind of a good problem to have in some ways. But it was also like, I was also sort of head of product and leading that. And then the product wasn't getting the attention it needed, which, short term is fine, but long term, like, it doesn't matter if you're selling if the product's not delivering. So we were starting to see some cracks in other parts of the org because I couldn't split my time, and the context switching was damaging. But the other thing I realized, I think this is my biggest, if there's like one single learning to like clip out of this and be like, this is the thing I've learned about founder-led sales. I think for a long time, I thought I was good at founder-led sales, but in reality, I was good at being an evangelist. Okay. And I think as a founder, it's really, 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 really easy to confuse those two, because early on, for the first 5, 10, 20, maybe 100 customers, depending on what kind of company you are, what you're selling, being an evangelist and being that person who just like knows the product inside and out, knows the space inside out, is excited by it, brings that energy, that's enough to get those early adopters to buy. And you end up convincing yourself, you're like, look, I got 20 customers. I'm a great salesperson. It's like those 20 customers would have bought if there was no product. They just listened to the founder talk. They're like, yep, I believe the vision. I want to be an early adopter. I'm a fan. Let's go. And then you hit this wall where you're like, why can't I get the 21st customer? What is going on here? Like, you've tapped out the sort of low-hanging evangelist sales, and no longer is excitement or vision enough to convince someone to buy. And that's when it becomes, especially if you're like, for us, we are selling more of like a proper like enterprisey product. So like there's a sales process, et cetera. Getting someone excited and actually running a sales process to close is not the same thing. But it's really easy to convince yourself it is as a founder. So for me, the big learning was that I suck at sales, but I'm great at evangelizing. Not that I suck at sales when it comes to like running a full process. Like, it's also just not the way my brain works. I am not a very like process-driven person. So it's just like, it's just, I'm the kind of person I think that will take, I'll take on too many deals at once, and then I'll drop balls, making sure all the deals move forward. Because I'm just like, I'm excited. Like, yes, I'll talk to more people. More people want to buy. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And then you're like, oh shit, I forgot to follow up with that guy for 2 days. I'm like, oops, that's not good. He doesn't want to buy now because he's not interested. Like, whatever, right? Time kills all deals, as they say.
Yeah. So let's
So
go
that's
back
been
to
the big learning. Yeah.
That's such a great learning. Let's go back to so you probably don't suck at it, but I think it is, you recognize that there are experts at it, or people who are professional salespeople who think about it in a very structured approach that's needed when you're trying to scale something or get beyond just the excitement from a founder. But those first few customers that you got, what was your approach to kind of getting them in the door? I think with a lot of founders that don't have a sales background, that kind of, it gets scary, and it's easier just to build versus it is to go talk to customers. What was your kind of search for product market fit from a sales approach at the beginning of that?
So I think one of the best advantages you have as a founder when you're doing early sales is you can sell without selling. A salesperson struggles to sell without selling because it's obvious when a salesperson reaches out to you that they're trying to sell you something. But as a founder, especially early stage, you can start a lot of conversations by reaching out for feedback or input or insight to your target buyers and just have conversations. And in my experience, naturally, some of them will turn into buying conversations, right? You go talk to 50 people in your ICP, worst case, you're going to learn a shit ton. Things are going to get better, whatever. Best case, 5 of them are going to go, hey, this is really cool. Also, I'd love to try it out. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. And then you go from there.
So yeah, I was under the impression that kind of you should be kind of clear in whether you're doing research or clear in whether you're selling. And it sounds like for you, it worked to blend the two into, hey, we're talking about this. Like, how do you approach that kind of mindset?
So it was research. Right. I mean, it's not, I think if you go in to say, hey, can I get your input? And then you get on the call and you're like, hey, you want to buy my shit? People are going to be like, yo, what? That's not what I agreed to. So it is truly going in with the intention for customer research, market research, conversations. It's just that if you're actually building something people actually want, they will start a buying conversation. Like, they will initiate it and they will turn the conversation from research into buying. And I actually think, in my opinion,
start pulling it from you.
Yeah, that's one of the best. Like, because a lot of times people also get on calls with you as a founder and they won't be honest with you. I'm like, this is really cool. And like, a lot of founders get excited and be like, oh, I spoke to 50 VPs of sales and they said my product is cool. And I would say, if you spoke to 50 and not a single one expressed interest in using it, and all they said was it's cool or they were excited by it, they're just being nice to you. So it's like, if you want those conversations to happen naturally as a sign that you're building something worth having a sales conversation.
So I like it. So you can reach out to people or prospects for research, from genuinely getting feedback. And if they don't pull your product,
and not everyone will.
You don't have product market fit. No. But like if nobody does,
but at least early, I would say, no, you're not product market fit, but that early stage is like, do you have problem market fit, right? Like, are you building a thing that your ICP says, this is interesting, I would actually like to use it? And then product market fit is like, have you now created like a repeatable process to get that to more of that ICP? But it's like pre-product market fit, or like a problem market fit, as I've heard some people describe it.
Oh, that's really helpful. And then to your definition of product market fit, that repeatable process, how far along did you get into that before you made your first sales hire?
I don't think we were there at all, actually, which also I think goes against a lot of traditional advice. A lot of advice I read on making your first sales hire is like, get your first $1 million as the founder, find product market fit, build a system, and hire someone who can take that system and run with it. And that's great. If you happen to be a salesperson who started a company and you know how to do that, great. Yeah, do that, right? But I think a lot of times, being a founder, in my opinion, you're always going to have to do things you're not great at as an early stage founder. That's just the nature of the thing, right? You cannot afford to or hire someone. You're gonna have to figure shit out on your own. But eventually you want to get to a point where you can hire people who are smarter than you to do the things that you're not best at, so you can focus on doing the things that you're best at. And like I said, I realized that I'm a better evangelist than I am a salesperson. So as soon as I felt like we had something that at least showed that we were trending towards product market fit, we had like some customers, some proof, etc., I realized it was time to hire someone who could actually build the process to help us get to product market fit, because I was never going to be the one who could build a process and then hire someone and say, hey, everything's good. Here's the box. Take it, run with it. Good luck, have fun.
Okay.
So I think our first sales hire, I viewed them as more of like, how do I hire a sales partner who like we together are going to figure this out because they will bring that sales expertise, the system. I'll bring the product knowledge, the expertise, the evangelism. And you need both halves of that. Like I think I see so often, this is like we saw this with our VP that we hired.
I was
Which
just say,
like
so I'm assuming this new person is not a VP. Was not a VP.
No. They are very much like a player coach. Like they're the person who I think could grow into our VP of sales, but they are in the trenches, owning deals, selling deals, but also then like helping build process as they learn by doing that. And I think the problem with going straight to the VP hire is the VP tends to come with a playbook they already know. And they expect to take their existing playbook, implement it, and run. But if you hire this like pre-VP who's going to get in the trenches with you, they're going to help you figure out your playbook. And you want to figure out your playbook, not the playbook somebody else did at another company and just wants to like, square peg, round hole do here. Yeah. You might learn a lot. There might be things you can take from other playbooks, but ultimately like your sales playbook has to some degree be yours.
What I think the thing that is like glaring to you and to me and to others who have been through this is that first sales hire needs to be selling alongside the founder. The founder can't check out, right? And you can't hire someone to scale the thing. It's a salesperson that brings in sales IQ, right? Like, I think you'd prefer, as you said, the process to be a bit further along, maybe to your definition, further towards product market fit, more of a repeatable process. Because basically what you're getting at is that conviction, you have conviction to make a hire that will help accelerate things. Now, not a lot, not like a VP of sales, but accelerate the learning, accelerate the process.
Yeah. It's a harder hire to find, I think. Yes. That like pre-VP, because you're looking for someone who's like kind of got a toe in the VP camp, but they're still a seller. Versus if you're hiring a VP,
is what I would call that. Yes.
Yeah, it is. So that's what we've called our hire. But it's a very specific type of person that actually can do that. It has to be a self-starter. It has to be a person who's like comfortable with the unknown and like not having a perfect playbook. Ideally, I think I could be convinced that this opinion's wrong. This is like a strong opinion loosely held, but I do think it has to be someone who like truly believes in what you're selling and isn't just viewing this as like I can learn a thing and sell it and therefore, pick up a paycheck.
No, I thought you were going to. I thought that opinion was going to be far more bombastic. I think that I would agree with that.
As I was thinking about it, I was trying to think. I think there's probably cases where that actually like is hard to do, depending on what you're selling. Of like, but like we are selling sales tech, so for we're selling sales tech.
The salesperson doesn't believe in the thing at a deep level early.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think it's going to be.
Yeah, there's like, and like I think that Eric, who's our head of sales, he lives and breathes the philosophy that our product is built on, which I think is like just so he has a little bit of like that evangelism thing that I'm good at, and it's like so I think we complement each other really really well in building it out and doing what we're doing. But he is still very much your traditional salesperson who is motivated by money, which you also want. And I think that's also a mistake that I've seen founders make is they hire that first salesperson and they're like they hire the non-killer, the person who's like because they think they're not quite ready for that yet or whatnot.
Wants to work at a startup and has some sales experience.
Yeah, you get a lot of those, or like the SDR who's just like spent 6 months of a job. And they're like, I fucking hate this. And they're like, yeah, I'll be the first sales hire at your startup. Whatever. I hate being an SDR here.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very specific type of person that you can hire as this like pre-V. I've seen more companies hire it as actually like a head of growth or like a GTM lead, like more of like a just generalist person who can sell, do a little bit of marketing. Like I think that can work as well as that.
Also
first
very
hire.
Hard. Someone who can sell and do a little bit of marketing excellently, better than two people. Like that's also getting into unicorn territory.
I mean, that's also like the first 10 hires you make at your startup anyways, though. You're typically looking for someone who's a little more than just a cookie cutter role, whether it's sales or not. I mean, those first 10 hires are the hardest thing to get right. And they set the tone for everything that comes out.
Yeah. So this Eric. Yep. Eric. Sounds like a great hire. Props to Eric.
He is. Yeah. He's doing a great job.
How much, because using the title head of sales, you said it's quite loose. I agree with it. You can use it kind of loosely. You said it's someone who has dipped their toe into VP of sales, which I agree, but it's dangerous because once you get there, you're kind of want to just a manager. You're not trying to sell. How much in Eric's experience, or in this case, how much management experience did he have that he had enough to get you excited that he could understand the principles and the frameworks, or like implementing some stuff, but not so far away from individual contributor land that he wasn't willing to get his hands dirty, and it sounds like as long as it takes to get to the point of the scale.
Yeah, so I'm pulling up his like resume right now so I can double check because I don't exactly remember. But I want to say he'd had some sales management experience. I don't think he'd been a VP though.
Okay.
So he'd been head of sales at one other startup where he had like 2 other sellers working with him, which was very similar.
Okay.
Like he was still selling. So he had seen that.
Wait, sorry, that's really important. So he was still selling.
Yeah.
I think
so he was still, he was still selling. That's the thing.
If you stop selling, that's probably the key, that it's not a good hire. I mean, maybe if it stopped selling 2 months ago, that's different. But if they've stopped selling for 6 months, a year, and they're in management level, right?
No, he was not in the tower of pure management ever yet. The other thing that's actually interesting that I forgot about that we did with Eric, we actually hired him fractionally for 3 months before we hired him full time.
Okay.
So we technically hired him as like a sort of like a sales consultant to start. Of like, he wasn't necessarily running deals, but he was like, shadowing me on deals, giving me advice, helping build out some of the process. And we knew within 30 days, it was like, we want to just hire you full time. This is working really well. But I think it's a really good way also to test the waters before you jump in full time, both for the hire and for the company. Because I remember a recruiter friend of mine said, he was like, listen, even the best recruiters in the world get it wrong 20% of the time. At the end of the day, you're never truly going to know until you spend 60 to 90 days working with a person. No matter what their references say, no matter what their resume says, no matter how well they did in the interviews, you're never going to know. So I think for those first hires, it's really good just to like find some way to work with them before you just like jump in fully.
Yeah, and pay them, right? Like you said, as a consultant.
Yeah, it's paid consulting.
Right?
It was no free work, and I've seen companies do the free work. I've spoken to people who've had that happen to them. Yes, it was a paid role.
So what do you see as where are you in this journey now? As like the next steps that you're taking? It sounds like you're starting to put some frameworks in place. It sounds like you're starting to get kind of a more consistent sales process. What do you see as kind of the next step in this process?
I would say a lot of it is refining. And then when you think you've refined enough, refining 10 times more. So a lot of it for us is like, if I go back even just 4 months, I look at what our ICP definition was versus what it is. Actually, we literally redid it and implemented a new definition today.
Congrats. That's good.
So much more focused. And it's funny because like 4 months ago, it was more focused than the previous definition, right? It was like, but a lot of it is like, I think there are cases where some people start a company and they just know from day one, they know everything. They're like, I know I'm building for this person, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's pretty rare. I'm a huge fan of the line, like no plan survives contact with the customer. Right? It's like, you can plan all you want, but until you get out there in front of people, you're never going to know. So a lot of what Eric and I have been doing is really just like, figure out what's working and refine. Okay, this kind of customer doesn't work well. Cool. Stop going after that kind of customer. This kind of customer works well. Cool. Double down. How do we find more of that customer? What's working well? What does that process look like? So I think the thing we're doing as well that I like compared to the previous attempt to get out of founder-led sales, last time when we hired a team right away. So we tried to like have a playbook on day one. We're like, cool. We hired a person, build a playbook, go build a team. What we're doing now is we're not necessarily trying to define a playbook. We're trying to refine a system. So it's like, it might take us 6 more months, 9 months, a year, who knows, to feel like we have a proper playbook that we can like scale a team on. But I think the only way to learn for us is very much like, is just to do it and to figure it out and to iterate and to have that iterative learning mindset. It's also interesting for us because we are a sales tech company. So there's a big element for us is like, how does our own tech and tool fit into the sales process? Like, how do we be our own best customer? Yeah. And I will say that's also, I think, a benefit of hiring a salesperson earlier than most people have advised me to is I now have a salesperson who's not me, who can see the forest for the trees, who isn't rosy-eyed about like our tech is perfect and I'm the founder, so I'm going to see what I want to see. So it's like our product has gotten better since hiring Eric because now he's using it. He's like, guys, this sucks. Like this part of the product doesn't work. And I'm like, cool. Because like it's a real salesperson really using it as a customer.
So being patient, obviously, the second time around and focusing on kind of the first principles of getting it right is awesome.
Yeah.
What would you say to other founders to keep their investors? I mean, there's a theme earlier, keep their investors at bay when it's just like, well, you got to go, you got this money. And it's actually, no, they should really be refining this and getting a strong foundation so that when you do go, you're in a really good place to scale.
I think it starts with not over raising. There are some cases where it can work out. Obviously, we over raised like in a huge way. Because when you over raise, that pressure and expectation goes up. So it's harder and harder to keep that at bay the higher those expectations get.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's just like, and this is something I did really poorly, I think, when we hired that VP of sales back then, like, it's just keeping those lines of communication open about what's going on, what's working, what's not working, right? Like, it shouldn't come as a surprise to your investors, like it did to ours, admittedly, that this VP we've had for 6 months isn't working out. That should not be a surprise to them. Because it's like, it was also one of our investors had made the intro and recommended we hire the guy. Like, it was a personal recommendation from our VCs. And 6 months later, I was like, that guy you recommended us, like, didn't work at all. Like, what the hell? And he's like, what? I had no idea, right? So I think a lot of it's just like, it's being honest about where you are and what the expectations are. And I would say as much as you can, don't let investors make those decisions for you. Like, listen, investors are great. There are some investors that suck. There are some that are non-events. There are some that are great. But at the end of the day, your job is to build a company. And if VCs have given you money, your job is to build a company that can drive a return for them. But you're never going to drive a return for them if your goal is to drive a return for them, is sort of my take. Like, you have to, kind of goes back, like, you have to build a good company for the sake of building a good company. And then the benefit for the VCs will happen. And I would say if VCs that you have don't understand that, they're shit VCs.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, for sure.
So I would say it's, so I think be careful who you take money from is where it starts, right? Because if you take money from the wrong person, you might be fucked.
Right, and setting the right expectations, right? That you do have an investable business, and if you don't, and you set the wrong expectations, then they invest. It's only going to make your life much harder to kind of figure these things out. Well, you've been very generous with your time, and we want to get you back, so we're going to be respectful of your time. Last question, and you've already given some good advice on this, but what advice about sales that you've received that you haven't shared yet that you think is totally shit?
This is not necessarily founder-led sales specific, but kind of just like sales specific. I think the obsession over metrics does more harm than good at sales.
Okay.
Now, metrics are important. Like, you should track things. You should be aware of your metrics. But I feel over the last decade especially, it feels like it's coming undone a little bit. But so much of sales has been turned into this pure numbers game, right? You put this activity in, you get these meetings out, you get this out. And I feel like, especially at enterprise sales, a lot of salespeople and sales leaders have lost the understanding that their job is to help a buyer save time, save money, make money, have a better life, whatever. And if you do that, you get the deal. And if you do that, you get your commission check. But it's like, I think honestly, a lot of it is a bit of a long answer, but I think for a time back in for a while, I don't know how many years back it goes, but for a while, a lot of people were told that the best way to make six figures is to get into sales. So a lot of people got into sales with just the goal of and I'm not saying salespeople should be money motivated.
Yeah.
But a lot of them seem to have lost the empathy for the human on the other side of the sales conversation. You've heard this term like commission breath and buyer's consensus. And I think I talk about this idea of the sales Ouroboros for a while, that I feel like sales and kind of go to market in general, marketing is almost just as much to blame as sales is here, has kind of been devouring itself, where it's buyers get fed up, so they are less responsive to sales and marketing and direct outreach. Yeah. So we respond by sending more of it. So buyers become less responsive, so it gets less effective. So we respond by sending more. And it's and I feel like it's just it's been compounding on itself for a decade, and it feels like it's starting to reach a little bit of a breaking point right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of the best salespeople I know, they are not the ones who are hitting their metric goals by calls made, emails sent, but they're the ones who are hitting the highest quota reps are not the ones following your numerical sales process. But at the same time, I met a rep the other week who was at 160% of quota on average over, I think it was 3 quarters.
Great.
Got fired for not making, they got fired for not making enough calls.
Right. That makes no sense. The reason I've been laughing this whole time you're saying this is We turned into like the templatized sales rep, that every rep needs a template. And I'm like, okay, so we need to reach out to this group of clients. These are our current clients. We need to talk to them to understand why they're not expanding. And they're like, all right, so we need to build some templates. I'm like, wait, what would we templatize when we're going to go talk to these humans who are each unique in how they use our product? We want to understand this, right? It's like this whole like, we need a cadence, we need templates, we need to just crank this out and spam. It's like, no.
They think that a perfect sales process is going to solve all their problems. Buyers don't give a shit about your sales process.
Yeah.
I always think of like, there's this funny meme of like a path in a park with a gate on the path, but then there's no fence on either side of the gate. And that gate to me feels like what a lot of sales teams' perfect process is. Buyers are just like, I don't care. I'm just going to walk around it. Only buyers can decide when they want to buy. Buyers are in control. And like, I think a lot of sales teams have lost the human, creative, non-numerical art of sales.
And I would argue it's not even their fault, because I'm seeing sales reps, they've never learned the right way that it's like creative thinking in this whole thing, humans. And then also
it's first principles
again, beat out of them by the sales leadership. That's like, we need to have these templates. You can kind of send only these templates. And they're like, all right, boss, I'll just crank this out. And I guess like do what you're telling me to do.
A lot of sales leaders right now, they came up in a world for like from 2008 till 2021. If you did your activity numbers, you would more often than not, hit your, the guy who wrote predictable revenue, Aaron Ross, is on record recently as having said that the predictable revenue model doesn't work anymore. Right. The guy who wrote the thing you're all basing your sales process on doesn't believe it anymore.
Yes.
So I just think there's a lot. This is like whether it's founder-led sales or big companies. Like, I think, and also just marketing as well, I think most companies would be better off spending 20 to 25% of their time and budget on things that they know will not be perfectly measurable or perfectly attributable. And I guarantee that the overall numbers will go up if they do that.
I like that. More personalization, more creativity, more focus on
not personalization for the sake. I think people also take personalization to mean like, I saw you went to this school. Did you enjoy the like XYZ tradition? Like at the end of the day, like if you're worried about your job being replaced by AI, you're probably doing a shit job of sales.
Yeah. Because you're not doing the critical thinking of putting together your value proposition with why they would buy it in a way.
If an AI SDR can replace you, you're not doing it right.
So there's a place for salespeople. Maybe that's for our next interview around AI replacing sales. But for now, the good salespeople, the humans, are safe.
Yeah, I know a guy who hit quota, like closed the biggest deal in his company's history by playing Call of Duty with the prospect.
Right.
Like,
what's the metrics?
You got to know the guy, right? Like, yeah, how do you? It's like, well, you wasted 3 hours playing Call of Duty with the guy. He's like, yeah, but I closed a $6 million deal. It's like, who gives a shit? You're mad that I didn't make cold calls for 3 hours? Who cares?
I love it. Doesn't fit in a spreadsheet though, Mac.
Yeah. Well, that's like I said, it's like a lot of managers are more obsessed with if things are measurable than if things work.
Yeah. That's a good lesson to get us out on. Well, thank you so much, Mac.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hope to have you back. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with other founders.
Yeah, anytime.
Take care.